to live, work, and explore. We're gathered at the Sentinel Hotel along with all of you listening on OPB or viewing on Portland Community Media or YouTube. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners enables us to put on the state's best civic programs week after week. Our media partner is Oregon Business Magazine, and our current Friday Forum sponsors are Bank of the Cascades, Stoll Reeves LLP, Family Care Health, Russell Fellows Properties, and The Standard. Please show our appreciation for all of them. Joining us today are two candidates for Oregon House District 43, Roberta Phillip Robbins and Tana Sanchez. Roberta Phillip Robbins immigrated to the United States as a child and was the first in her family to attend college. She is a former public school teacher, earned a law degree, served as a judicial clerk, and now works as a youth gang prevention specialist for Multnomah County. Tana Sanchez grew up in Portland and has owned her home across from Jefferson High School for 19 years. Tana Sanchez is Director of Family Services at the Native American Youth and Family Center, where she has helped provide families with critical services like housing, education, workforce training, and elder care. Our moderator is Kalpana Krishnamurthy. Kalpana is the Senior Policy Director at Forward Together and the former field director at Western State Center, where she was the lead author on Oregon's and Nevada's legislative report cards on racial equity. Please welcome our moderator and the candidates to the stage.
Welcome to the first in a series of Friday Forum primary debates hosted by the City Club of Portland. I'm excited to be here today as 2016 marks the City Club's 100th year of hosting thought-provoking conversations like this one. I'm joined by the two candidates for Oregon's House District 43, Roberta Phillip Robbins and Tana Sanchez, who will each introduce themselves shortly. But before we begin, a quick note about the format of today. This is not going to be a formal debate with timers and yellow lights. We are going to make sure, and my job is to make sure, that the candidates have equal time and that we get to dig into the critically important issues that are facing District 43 and the entire state. And finally, I want to ask our audience here at the Sentinel to refrain from applause during the course of the conversation, but you can join me right now in offering a warm welcome to our two candidates, Tana Sanchez and Roberta Phillip. If you're just tuning in on OPB, you are listening to City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Kalpana Krishnamurthy, the Senior Policy Director at Forward Together, and I'm here with two candidates for Oregon House District 43, Roberta Phillip Robbins and Tana Sanchez. They're going to start with an opening statement, and Roberta, you'll go first.
Thank you. I'm running for the state legislature because it matters that everyone in our community have a safe and stable place that they call home, that working parents have access to quality, affordable childcare, that women can earn equal pay, and that workers have predictable schedules and paid family leave, whether they're caring for children or aging loved ones or both. I'm running because health outcomes in our city vary based on the color of your skin and your zip code. And because if you are poor or black or brown in our community, you will have a very different experience in the criminal justice system. Here's what's at stake. If we don't overcome these challenges, we won't reach our own potential as a state. And for children, both inside and outside the classroom, for people who are trying to build or rebuild their lives, and for our seniors who have to choose between food, rent, or medicine. None of this is easy, but I know all that can come from hard work and opportunity. My parents moved us from Trinidad when I was 13. I learned hard work meant my dad working 12 to 14-hour days, 6, sometimes 7 days a week. It meant taking 2 buses with my mom and my sister just to do laundry on a Saturday. And it definitely meant living paycheck to paycheck. Then opportunity came my way. I was able to enroll in a college prep program that invested in low-income kids of color and they couple that with high academic expectations. That opportunity changed the course of my life, and it inspired me for public service, first as an AmeriCorps volunteer, then as a public school teacher, offering students the knowledge, guidance, and inspiration they needed to later walk across that graduation stage. And now to my current work with Multnomah County, where I tackle root causes to find solutions to youth violence in our community. It is these life experiences and perspectives that I am eager to bring to our state legislature. It all comes down to 3 words: access, opportunity, and equity. And that's why I'm running to be your next state representative. Thank you.
Tana.
Good afternoon, and welcome everyone who's come, and all of you on the radio. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Tana Sanchez. I'm Shoshone, Bannock, Ute, and Carrizo, which is a non-federally recognized tribe from Texas. I was born here I was born in Oregon. I was born in Salem. My parents were living here in Portland, in Northeast Portland, when I was born. I think I was born in Salem because my grandfather and my 2 older aunts were living in Salem at the time. I think my mother wanted to be connected there when I was born. But I've spent most of my life on and off here in the Portland metro area, growing up in Northeast Portland. My dad worked at Sherfit Auto Parts, right there, auto upholstery right there on what was Union Avenue. Now it's MLK, of course. But I've watched this community change over the years. Many, many different opportunities have happened in my personal life, but as I've always been a part of this community, I've seen shifts and changes in such an amazing way. It's really stunning to me from when I grew up here, seeing the different looks of our community and the different opportunities in our community, and always recognizing that as a person of color, I had just a little bit less going on there. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I went to school here, but I didn't do all that well in school. I went to an alternative school, Willamette Learning Center, which doesn't exist anymore, but I didn't graduate, and I didn't get a GED. And part of the reason that happened is because there were people paying attention to me. Actually, NAIA Family Center was paying attention to me when I was a kid. And that was a good thing. I really learned a lot about reading, and a lot about political action, and a lot about why things were the way they were in our communities. And as an Indigenous person, I learned a lot about the law and treaty rights and how different laws affected different people. That was always amazing to me, to learn those different things. But as I grew up, as a young person, I decided, okay, well, I have to do something different. I have to make a difference here, because I'm seeing how different things are for different people. So I actually just went into a community college and took the test, and nobody asked me if I had a high school diploma or a GED, and I didn't tell them. So that opportunity was just an amazing thing that happened, and so I have, goodness. So I just want to tell you about that. I have that first little associate's degree in business administration. I went on to get a bachelor's degree in psychology and communications, and a certificate in alcohol and drug study, and a master's degree in social work, because opportunities came to me. And I've been doing work for many, many years to support my community, because I recognize that things are wrong and things need to be shifted and things need to change.
Thank you. If you're just tuning into OPB, you're listening to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Kalpana Krishnamurthy, Senior Policy Director at Forward Together, and I'm here with 2 candidates for Oregon House District 43, Roberta Phillip Robbins and Tana Sanchez. We're going to start our conversation today with some focus on economic justice issues and a wide array of topics that fall under that basket. Let's start with something that I know is on everyone's mind, which is our housing affordability crisis here in Portland. The average rent in Portland has jumped 41% since 2010, and District 43 in particular has been hard hit by gentrification, which has resulted in skyrocketing rents and home prices. There are policy solutions, including inclusionary zoning, which the Oregon legislature just lifted a ban on, requiring specific shares of new construction to be affordable by people with low and moderate incomes. There are other solutions as well. How would you address the housing crisis that we're facing? Let's start with you, Tana.
Well, let me just say, I've talked to a lot of different people during this process, and knowing also on the ground in the work that I've done for many, many years, how gentrification has affected our communities and how many people of color we've had to move into the east part of Portland and into Gresham and Troutdale even to Vancouver to be able to afford the housing. I've watched that happen for many years now, and I recognize that internally, we have to figure out, first of all, how to keep people in their homes in the first place, how to keep families long-term in their homes, how to make sure that seniors don't get pushed out because they're either their medical situations or their physical things that are happening to them aren't causing them to lose their homes. I think some of the things that we have to really look at is how we address the issue of the additional dwelling units, not pricing out the families to be able to make those things happen. We need to look at how we're taxing that and maybe make that more equitable for families so that they can be those intergenerational families, that they can support seniors living in their own homes and younger families living with them as well. That makes sense to me. It makes sense to me that the inclusionary zoning pieces work, but that they work at a better level, that we're not just making just a few houses affordable for only a short period of time. We need to make that more long-term. I think that we have to maybe, in particular for 43, because it's not getting any bigger, we're going to have to make sure that we are able to build housing or maintain current housing in a way that's affordable for folks. And I don't have all the answers, but one of the things that I'm really good at is finding the answers when I need them.
Thank you. Roberta.
So for families to be successful, we know that they need a place to live. We know that that place needs to be affordable, it needs to be stable, and unfortunately, too many middle and low-income families are being pushed out of House District 43. They're being priced out of the market for rent, and let alone having the option to buy a home. Without housing stability, it's difficult for kids to do well in school. I think about the ripple effect of housing instability in our communities. It's difficult for parents to maintain jobs when they have to all of a sudden have an hour and a half, 2-hour commute. And it's difficult for our seniors to live quality lives when they're uprooted because of economics. I have a lot of hope actually for the recent partnership between Multnomah County and the City of Portland to address our housing crisis. And I definitely want to thank Chair Kafori for that and the City of Portland because they have made major investments in affordable housing that I think will be key as we move forward. And we need developers who are willing to develop in the right way and who are willing to open the market for affordable housing. And as a state legislature, I know it will be my job to support these local efforts. And with moves like inclusionary zoning, for instance, it gives local jurisdictions an added tool in their toolkit to open the market up. The bottom line is we do need more units. We are what is the most desirable place in the U.S. to move to and to live, and there simply is not enough units. And so that is a key issue that we have to deal with. As well, we know that new housing dollars have to have an equity lens on them. I mean, it's not just an infusion of money, but we need to be looking at where that money is going. Is it being equitably spent? And communities have to be involved in that process.
Thank you. During the 2016 legislative session, the legislature passed a bill that will raise Oregon's minimum wage to different levels in 3 geographic regions by 2022. Now, some advocates argued that this compromise legislation was too small and too slow, and that counties should be allowed to set their own higher minimum wage. Do you feel like the tiered minimum wage plan that passed will meet the needs of Oregonians, or would you have it go further? Let's start with you, Roberta Phillips-Robbins.
Sure, thank you. So I believe it's a good start. We know that folks needed a raise in our communities. People needed to earn more money because they just were simply working full-time and still relegated to poverty, and that's not right. So I want to commend the legislature for moving forward on that, and I think we've led the country, really, and that's something to be proud of. So, what we do know is that 62% of low-wage workers in our community are women. And we do know that when we talk about minimum wage, we're not just talking about teenagers working fast food. We're talking about grown-ups who have children whose children are depending on them to stabilize them. And that has to be part of how we talk about minimum wage. We know that 72% of workers in tipped occupations are women, and we know that there's a disparity in income based on whether or not you are a person of color, and even more so if you are a woman of color. So I do believe that I understand where the legislature is coming from in that, $15 an hour, how I've been talking about it with voters on the doorstep, is that folks recognize that $15 an hour to live on Williams Avenue is very different than $15 an hour to live somewhere else, possibly a rural community in our state. So the tiered system made sense. I think we also need to look at now the ripple effect of what that means for our local community and certainly House District 43. And is it really allowing folks to thrive in the way that we hope they will?
Thank you. Tana Sanchez.
Well, I appreciate the effort around the minimum wage issue, and certainly, necessity says that maybe we need to start small. The fact of the matter is, however, that no matter where, even when we get to $15 an hour in 7 years, it will still not be a living wage. That's the sad reality that we're at here in Portland and in the whole state. So I'm frustrated by that. And I ask myself, what can we do differently then? So maybe when I was a kid, the minimum wage was for those teenagers, as was mentioned, in the burger joints, in the different places like that. They shouldn't be for wage earners. Family wage earners shouldn't be making minimum wage. We should be making money enough to be able to support our families. How do we do that? So maybe the minimum wage isn't really the question, but how we invest in the work that we do here in the state of Oregon. Maybe that's the bigger question. Maybe how we're investing in our education system that brings people to the fore who actually can do jobs that pay more than the minimum wage, that actually pay a living wage. So for years, it has been my standard, because I'm an employer, to not pay anybody below $15 an hour if I can possibly help it. But even the federal standard for my Head Start workers makes me pay them $11 an hour, $11.50 an hour. And so we have to ask that question too. If we're moving our minimum wage to that standard, what's the Fed going to do? How are they going to help us meet that standard as well? I am concerned very much about single families, mothers on WIC. In a couple of years, right now, as far as I understand it, it won't matter. If you work full-time minimum wage job, wherever that ends up being for the next couple of years, you'll be okay. You'll still qualify for WIC. In a couple of years, you might not, unless the federal standard moves up. Those are concerns that I have about the minimum wage. I did have a concern, and I still do, because I haven't actually personally, and maybe it's not up to me, but personally haven't heard from folks in the rural area about how they feel about it. I think that rural Oregon often gets the feeling that they're left behind in a lot of issues, and so that's a concern that I have as well. And that may not be the case, and I do understand that legislators in the rural areas agreed to this, so I'm okay with it. I just want to make sure that we're thinking about that the rural areas are also struggling with those minimum wage issues.
In this last answer, about who the folks are that are at the crux of poverty in the state of Oregon, and who are most at risk when we talk about issues of economic security. So whether we're talking about minimum wage or housing affordability, these issues disproportionately affect women, and they disproportionately affect women with children. In fact, motherhood is a leading predictor of poverty. What would you do as a legislator to improve economic security for women and mothers in Oregon? Tana, let's start with you.
Wow. Well, I often fall back on education, because that is the place where I come from. NAIA Family Center has been working on education since I was a kid. And that's one of our main core issues, is making sure that our young people are educated and able to enter into jobs that make sense and that they can do long term. So I'm very much for being able to support an extension of ERDC, the employment-related daycare, so that moms can work longer term, and making sure that they don't get cut off at a point where they're just starting to make a decent amount of money and to be able to support their children. I am very, very concerned about affordable childcare. I have 2 early Head Start childcare classes right now, just 2. That's just 16 kids. We need to have more affordable childcare so that moms can work, so that people can actually do what they need to do to support their kids. The idea that a mom on TANF wants to be on TANF and live on TANF is amazing to me, that we still think like that, or that we think that somebody's, working the system. TANF is $406 a month for a mom with one kid and food stamps. Now, I know I can't live on that. I don't think anybody really realistically can live on that, and it requires you to do more than that $406 a month. It requires you to do more than, so maybe they are in some way, shape, or form shafting the system. But if you can't live on it, I don't think you should expect a mom with a kid to live on it either. People, AmeriCorps Vistas make more money than a single mom on TANF. So, we need to put things in place like childcare, like employment issues, situations that work for moms in terms of scheduling and those types of things, like jobs that make sense, like education, to be able to make sure that she can get maybe some level of a degree that will help her get to that living wage job. I so want living wage jobs in the state of Oregon, and I think we are so capable of it. We simply have to make the effort to push that forward.
Thank you. Roberta.
Thank you. I think the statistic you started with, Kalpana, around motherhood being a predictor of poverty is an embarrassment in our country. And I just want to start there. We can do better, and I believe we should and we will, because families, children, the future of our state, it depends on how we address that statistic that you shared. So as chair of the Oregon Council on Civil Rights, we worked to complete an employer best practices document called Pay Inequity in Oregon, and this was back in 2014. And one of the key pieces of that was a suite of recommendations for employers on best practices for women in the workplace. How do we address the gender pay gap? What is it that, that employers can do to secure mothers and families when women are back at work? So one of the things we talked about, of course, was paid family leave, and that is something I intend to champion in the legislature. It is, we are in the company of Papua New Guinea in terms of our paid family leave policy as a country, and that, is something we can do better at for sure. Certainly employer-related daycare, and when we talk about family wage jobs, as Ms. Sanchez did, I want to specifically talk about access to career technical education for women, to talk about apprenticeship programs and pipelines to apprenticeship programs. Our labor organizations are waiting to employ more women, and we need to make sure that that pipeline exists so that the folks who want access have access to those family wage jobs.
So our last question in this area of economic justice will focus a little bit on something both of you have touched on about access to programs and access to basic needs in the workforce. Many Oregon workers don't have access to paid family leave to care for a family member, and if they do, the definition of family that's used in these policies may be too narrow and not reflect how our families actually look today. As the advocates in Oregon try to move paid family legislation in 2017, they are using a broad and inclusive definition of family, where it's defined by blood or affinity. What's your position on paid family leave and using a broad definition of family within that legislation? Roberta, let's start with you.
I'm so happy you asked this question. So I was endorsed by Basic Rights Oregon, and I'm very proud of that endorsement. They dual endorsed us because I believe that they know my values align with, I won't even say inclusivity because that doesn't do it justice, but I believe that family is defined as broadly as you can define it. In fact, family of choice is as important as blood origin. And folks need to have the option, they need to be respected when their family of choice is someone that they need to take time off, paid family leave to take care of. We are not and should not be in the business of determining what that definition is. I will say that House District 43 has the luxury of being one of the most progressive districts in the state, and I think it is incumbent on the person who represents this district to hold that line very strongly. And when it comes to this type of definition and this type of advocacy, you should not only expect that, but look for the person representing this district to lead the charge on those issues.
Thank you. Tana?
So, of course, I'm very, very much in favor of paid family leave. It's so very important for families to be able to take that time to bond with their children. Bonding is one of the most important things that you can do with a child to make sure that their life going forward is connected and that they feel safe in who they are. In my community, and I think in many, many other communities, the definition of family is massive. I probably, who knows how many hundreds of kids call me auntie. They started to call me grandma recently, so too. Kind of, I don't know, I'm not sure quite how to take that part, but I'm getting used to it. The hair is getting grayer, so it's great. But that's very normal in our community. It's very normal for extended family. In the Native community, when forced relocation situations happen and people were relocated into the urban areas, that's one of the things that happened very clearly in our communities. You would recognize other Native people in the community, and you just sort of tilt your head like that and recognize that, hey, there's another Native person. And so when people came from the reservations into the urban areas and they didn't have their own family here, they connected with other Native families and other Native community members and created family. And so that's a norm for who we are. And I think it's a norm for many, many other people in communities who felt disenfranchised in some way from the rest of society, who felt a little bit different than everybody else. We created larger extended families, and we became those communities that called each other's aunties and uncles and grandparents and whatever, even mom and dad sometimes for young people who were raised in the foster care system and don't have those resources of that person who's related to them by blood. So that extension of who that family is an amazingly important thing to make sure that, in particular, as I said, those young people in foster care, that they have that connection to somebody that they can call family and relative and who can support them in whatever way they can. Thank you.
Thank you. If you are just tuning in on OPB, you're listening to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Kalpana Krishnamurthy, Senior Policy Director at Forward Together, and I'm here with two candidates for Oregon's House District 43, Roberta Phillip Robbins and Tana Sanchez. Let's move into some other topic areas. Disparities around race are clear within Oregon's criminal justice system. While only 2% of the state's population is African American, nearly 11% of Oregonians who are currently incarcerated or on community supervision are Black. These stats are because African American youth and adults are disproportionately arrested and prosecuted. The legislature, the city, and Multnomah County have all taken some steps to look at addressing disparities within the system, but we obviously have a very long ways to go. What are your solutions for addressing racial disparities in our criminal justice system, and what do you think the legislature needs to do next? I think we're starting with you, Tana.
Okay. Well, so I've been a volunteer at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility for many, many years. And what I, of course, recognize is that, in particular, I work mostly with the Native women who are in prison and then exiting the prison, hopefully working on that recidivism issue. But what I recognize is that a lot of them are not identified as Native. And we asked that question, and so let me just say my last name, Sanchez, you would think, like, what's the first thing you think, right? You think that I might be Latina. That comes up a lot, but it isn't just names. What I know is that when a police officer arrests someone, they have that discretion to put that mark down, what they presume you might be. And so that makes it difficult to recognize who is actually in the prison. So we actually know that there are far more Native people in the prison system than are documented. That's one piece. How we address the issue of disparities of folks in prison is really comes down to a lot of how do we address things like profiling? You know, how do we address things like just how people walk through the system? I know we've been trying to do a lot of work around making sure that as we're looking at kiddos in our high school systems, how are we maybe making sure that the kids of color are not looked at differently, or that the punishments are not different for them than they are of white children? You know, we have to look at that issue, and that's something that we're working on in the school systems now. I think it really starts there. It really starts with that kind of disparity in who's making the law and how they're looking at how somebody gets punished for that. We know it happens as they run through the juvenile justice system. We know it happens, obviously, in the court system. I think that probably a part of that really will be somebody doing some intense evaluation and work on how the justice system is applied, because we know it's very, very different for communities of color. I want to make sure that as we're paying attention to those pieces and really seriously doing the research and evaluation. I think that's the important piece. And then hopefully helping people to look at their implicit bias in that system for how those people got there. I believe implicit bias is an issue that as not just a state, but as a nation, we have to look at in terms of these inequities in the criminal justice systems and in the foster care system. That's a big one for me. Foster care is a big issue because the implicit bias in those systems often sends kids of color into the system so much faster than any other issue. And so that's the piece I would look at. And it really is about training, as it really is about, investing in human beings who can do these jobs in a much more equitable and respectful manner for people of color.
Roberta Phillips Robbins, how would you address the disparities in the Oregon criminal justice system?
So I have to say that when the MacArthur Safety and Justice work came out, the Reducing Ethnic Disparities report came out, it wasn't a terrible shock to me. And it wasn't a terrible shock to a lot of communities of color who have been living and experiencing these disparities every day. What we have now is validation, and that means we have to have action. And, as we know, the statistics tell a horrific story. They tell a story of implicit bias at every decision stage in our system. It tells a story that the preschool to prison pipeline is very real, and I didn't misspeak. I said preschool because young people are being excluded, children, babies, are being excluded from school in preschool. And that leads to destabilizing factors all the way through their education journey. We need investments on the front end, not just in early childhood education and development. That's very important, and I want to see added investments there for sure, but also in getting more schools to use a human approach to accountability, and that's restorative practice. And we've seen some of that here, but it really needs to embody this belief that all kids are capable of success without exception. While serving as senior policy advisor to Multnomah County Chair Jeff Kogan, I learned about restorative justice in schools as a practice, as a promising practice, and as a tool to increase classroom engagement and decrease disproportionate discipline, and this was back in 2010 or so. I advocated for the creation of the School-Based Restorative Justice Initiative within 2 school districts and 4 schools, and that work helped to make the case for alternatives to excluding young people from school. So instead of suspending or expelling kids and sending them home where they may be engaged in something less enriching, we'll say, the county works with partners to not only have the young person understand the impact of their actions, but involve the victim in dialogue. And that's a very important part, and that's why that's the restoration piece, that it's not simply punitive, that it is actually how we build community. And I'm very confident that this is a tool that we should be using more in our schools and in our communities. We know about disproportionality, and we know that kids lose time when they're out of school, and that ripple effect is, we see that through attendance being poor and, further exclusion, and on it goes. So I just want to say that I am grateful that the parties got to the table and asked for the red report, because they did. And now that we know better, we must do better.
Thank you. Both of you talked about implicit bias as a layer within what's happening in the criminal justice system and the disparities that we see. Police accountability and racial profiling have been significant issues around the country. And I was wondering what role you think changes in policing and monitoring of police need to play in work in reforming the criminal justice system. Let's start with you, Roberta Phillips Robbins.
Sure, thank you. So there's a reason the US DOJ has cracked down so hard on our city police force. And the facts speak for themselves. I'm glad folks are being held accountable, but we know that we need culture change. We know that culture change happens when we speak openly about historical trauma and oppression, and we understand that mistrust of government for communities of color who have been historically oppressed is real. And that mistrust is something that should not and cannot be ignored if we are actually going to make strides as a community. So I believe that in my work actually as youth and gang violence prevention specialist with Multnomah County, I work for the Department of Community Justice Juvenile Services Division. And one of the things I'm working on is to guide a steering committee, which includes lots of law enforcement persons, but representatives, but also representatives from other areas of the work, so public health, schools, for instance, to really talk about what community policing and police accountability actually looks like. And one of our strategies is to improve the links between police, youth, and communities. And we absolutely must address these historic pieces, but we also need to create opportunities where there's positive interaction between law enforcement and young people, because there is mutual fear. And that is something that we need to speak openly about, that it's not just fear on one side, that folks are afraid on both sides, on all sides, of making it home. And we just have done a poor job of, and by we, I mean all of us who either perpetuate or don't make any positive action, toward bringing our communities together with law enforcement. I think, when police get out of their cars and they actually build relationships with folks, that to me is what real community policing is.
Tana Sanchez, racial profiling, police accountability, how do we get at the heart of this?
I think there's probably many different ways that we need to approach it. I think one would be, making sure that we actually have more communities of color in the system. And I don't want to, I guess I want to sort of say that around not necessarily let's just hire a bunch of people of color and have them enter a system that maybe they've struggled to get into and stay into for a very long time, because I know that issue exists as well. But I think that maybe is a part of an overall system. Policing has to look at how you've engaged in a way that maybe has not been as respectful or kind or appropriate in some manners. I know different folks of color who've tried to become police officers and have struggled within that system, and so maybe we have to look at that system and figure out how that happened and what that struggle was. So who knows, that might be an internal issue that needs to be looked at. And I actually had, one of my nieces was a police officer in Washington State for many years, and she didn't necessarily struggle as much as some folks did, but she identifies it's a difficult system to be in. Another piece, I think, I truly believe in community policing. I believe that police need to be engaged. They need to show up at things, and they do that at NEA quite a bit. We actually have a really good relationship with the police at NEA, and people have shown up at different events. We've had the police show up with their horses and, out in the field there, so that's been really great. So we're getting a little bit better at that, but I think we also have to address the fact that the historical trauma and long-term issues that have affected the way folks interact with the police is there, and maybe part of that is having that very open, frank conversation about how do we make that different, how do we own it and take responsibility and move forward in a way that makes sense for folks. I think there's also just internally sometimes some attitude that maybe we don't have to, and I think that needs to be addressed. And I know that's a harsh thing, and I'm an advocate for community and for people who've struggled, and so many times our community has struggled with police. And let me just say, I built a domestic violence program. When a victim of domestic violence calls the police and nothing happens, or an abuser is taken away and let out 1 minute after midnight, that doesn't give you a good feeling that they're supporting you or that they're helping you. And so we need to address issues like that.
If you're just tuning in on OPB, you are listening to City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Kalpana Krishnamurthy, the Senior Policy Director at Forward Together, and I'm here with two candidates for Oregon House District 43, Roberta Phillip Robbins and Tana Sanchez. I want to talk a little bit about LGBT issues. In the last week and a half, we have seen 2 states in the South, both Mississippi and North Carolina, legislators call for and pass legislation that revokes local non-discrimination ordinances in their state and also targets transgender people, particularly around public accommodations like bathrooms. Here in Oregon, we've had legal protections for LGBTQ Oregonians for nearly a decade, but challenges to that legislation are not uncommon. If elected to the legislature and this issue arose, how would you approach issues affecting lesbian, gay, bisexual, and particularly transgender Oregonians? Tana Sanchez, let's start with you.
In the culture I was raised in, we did not have an either or. There's many spectrums to how people identify in gender. And so traditionally, we didn't have that sort of thought process that you are this or you are that. And I'm going to try not to, I hope that I'm not offending anybody, but unfortunately, when Europeans came, you brought a different way of thinking about that. It was one or the other. And really pushed some laws and some things into effect here in this country that made that really different. And so I don't think about it like that there's an either or. I think we have a wide spectrum of human beings, and however they choose to identify, that is their absolute right. And no one has the right to take that away. Absolutely no one. At NAIA Family Center, we have boys' bathrooms, we have girls' bathrooms, and we have some bathrooms that don't say anything at all, because that's the choice you make, right? I don't want anything in this state or in this country to roll back to a place where we are being discriminated against anyone based on what they believe in their own heart and their own soul of who they are. And that's so very, very important to me. I was, I'll have to say, years ago when the first opportunity came for gay and lesbian couples to be married, I happened to be walking down the street and ran into a bunch of folks who were getting married at this, I can't remember the name of the building, but they were all getting married, and it was such an amazing thing because there were several people that I knew were getting married because they could for the very first time in their lives. And I've always known that I could get married. And it just upset me so much that my friends were all getting married at the same time because it was their very first opportunity. That's not okay. It's not okay for us to put people in that type of a box. And I would fight desperately to make sure that never happens again.
Thank you. Roberta Phillip Robbins, how do we address the attacks on lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender communities that we see coming from state legislatures, and what does it mean for Oregon?
I think as a state, we need to be outspoken because that is discrimination. And we need to be outspoken against other states who have repealed protections for folks who are LGBT. And we need to move ahead in terms of, okay, marriage equality is a win, absolutely. There are more protections that we need to fight for the LGBT community members among us. And we need to ensure that discrimination is not happening in the workplace, for instance. So one of the things I worked on as a staff member at the Office of Diversity and Equity at Multnomah County was a task force essentially on how we better support LGBT employees. And one of the issues that came up was that we don't even know how many employees we have at the county. And this actually came up out of community from folks who came to present to the Board of County Commissioners on data collection for the larger community in Multnomah County, and we realized that we needed to do some internal reflection, and so I led that effort. And so during the process of data collection and creating strategies for how to better support our LGBT employees, we heard terrible stories of employees who would not use the bathroom all day because they were gender specific, for instance. And I'm very proud to have been a part of Multnomah County Chair's Office staff around the creation of gender-neutral restrooms. That is a really big deal for folks who are struggling to find their place in the workplace. So absolutely protections. We need to build off of the wins that we have because there's much, much more to do in this arena.
Thank you. I want to move into education, talk a little bit about where we are today in Oregon's education system. And that is related to funding. So this November, voters are likely to see a ballot measure that proposes to increase Oregon's corporate income tax. Do you support or oppose the proposed corporate tax increase for the November ballot, and how do you see it helping or hurting efforts to more fully fund schools and human services? Roberta Phillip Robbins, let's start with you.
Thank you. So here's some things that I know for sure. I know that Oregon has the lowest corporate taxes in the country. I know that corporations like Bank of America, Comcast, and Walmart are making hundreds of millions of dollars from the business that they do in our state, and they pay lower taxes here than they do anywhere else in the country, and that's not okay. We know that our schools need more money. We know that our class sizes are the third largest in the nation, and that our school year is one of the shortest in the nation. Tens of thousands of kids don't have access to the early education they need to get ready for school. What IP 28 or Initiative Petition 28 will do will ask corporations to pay their fair share, and mind you, even with that measure in effect, Oregon would still have the lowest corporate taxes on the West Coast. So yes, I support it. And I want to do everything I can to see that added projected $5 billion in revenue gets to the state so that we can better fund education, healthcare, and elder care in our state. And we know that education is just the backbone. We know for sure that 0 to 5, that those 0 to 5 years are key to development, and that young people, kindergartners, enter school in kindergarten already behind. And we know practices that will close that gap, and with this funding, we'll be able to do that.
Thank you. Tana Sanchez, the corporate tax proposed ballot measure, what's your position on it, and how do you see it addressing some of the service and education funding needs that we have as a state?
So Roberta talked about all of the details. Those are all true. Those are all real. We have to recognize, yes, that Oregon has the lowest corporate tax in the country. It's amazing. Generally speaking, yes, I do. I absolutely support corporations paying their fair share. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I have not had 2 minutes to really sit down and read the entire thing and look at it and really be clear about what it all means. And that's something that I think is really, really important, because I'm hearing from business owners and business community that it's going to do something different. And that may be their personal belief, that may be just a struggle, but I want to give everybody that opportunity to say, this is my concern, or this is something I'm worried about. But again, overall, yes, I do believe corporations need to pay their fair share. It has to happen. We've done that too long. We've restructured this system to bring those corporations in, to make sure that we can build a better Oregon. And that's the important piece, is that Oregon is better, but we also want to make sure that that overall they end up paying their fair share of the taxes. I think that's really, really important. It will solidify the structures that we have in place. It will help definitely build education and other resources that we absolutely desperately need here in the state of Oregon.
So the money goes to actually fund what's happening in the schools and in the buildings, and moving from a question about funding to a broader question about educational opportunity. Oregon Black, Latino, Native American, and English language learner students all have higher dropout rates and lower graduation rates than their white and Asian peers. What are some of the specific strategies that you would use to support reductions in the enormous disparities between white students and students of color? Tana Sanchez, let's start with you.
Well, that's the work we do every day. So what I know, or well, let me just say, my experience in the Portland school systems. I was in the Portland school systems as a child. My son went to Sabin, to Beaumont, to Grant. I've had foster kiddos in Rigler and Jefferson, and in Nea's Early College Academy, as a matter of fact. What I know about our schools is that they're struggling. They're struggling with the large class sizes. They're struggling with the different issues that go on every day, just with students, who have issues. But I also know that as I talked about before, that implicit bias is a major issue. And I really, really hope that we can get to dealing with that issue. I want our schools to do better, but also want them to engage and recognize that maybe they can't do it all. And maybe we do need to invest in having those social service agencies that are communities of color invest in the schools and participate in that process. And we are kind of doing that with the SF 2020, Successful Families 2020. We have a collaborative going on that's doing that work. I think that there's also investments on other ends that maybe if we can't get enough money into the schools on one end, we need to figure out how we bring more people in to help. Because there are struggles for kids of color not being able to be successful because they're not seeing people who look like them in the classroom. Maybe they're not, that's not happening on a regular basis. Sadly enough, it's not. And we need to figure out how do we make that different as well. I would really love for our schools to be able to be reflective, just like our government should be reflective of who we are in this community. Our schools need to do the exact same thing, and we also need to make sure that if we can't do it right now, that we're at least helping kiddos with other issues that are making them struggle in the school system.
Roberta Phillip Robbins, how do we address the disparities in our education system that really come down around race?
Absolutely. So when our young people don't walk across that high school graduation stage, it's because we've failed them. Our graduation rates are embarrassingly low, and that's unacceptable. And as you pointed out, Black and brown kids are on the side of folks who are not graduating more often than not. My work with Multnomah County has been a systems level approach. But as a public school teacher, I was teaching biology in high school, and all I could think about was mitosis, but some of my students, all they could think about was the fact that they didn't eat that morning. And we really need to support teachers and schools with social service supports so that young people can get into the classroom and do what they're there to do, which is learn. What happens outside of the classroom affects what happens inside of the classroom, and I saw that firsthand as a public school teacher. Teachers can't do this work alone, and schools can't do this work alone. I do believe as well that we need to spend more on education, and we need to spend it wisely. Funding upstream for early education closes the achievement gap earlier. And so I don't believe that we just look at high school graduation rates starting in 9th grade. We must look at high school graduation rates starting with prenatal care.
Thank you. I have about 7 other questions and no time to do them. So we are going to move into closing statements, and each one of you will have 3 minutes to give a closing statement. I'm going to ask you to wrap in this because I have moderator's prerogative here. Between the House and the Senate, there are less than 5 people of color in Oregon's legislature right now. And yet on this stage, we have the first of a kind race between 2 candidates of color, 2 women of color. Tana, you would be the first Native American woman ever to serve in the state legislature. Roberta, you would be the first immigrant to serve from this district. What does it mean? What does this race mean to Oregon? What does it mean to District 43? And what do you want to leave our audience in the room and out in Radio Land thinking about in your closing remarks? We will start with Tana.
Well, in closing then, I do want to thank you all again for being here, for spending this time and for tuning in. I want to thank you, Kalpana, I almost got it wrong, and Roberta for taking the time to come in and do this. This is a very important thing to happen here. And it is a big issue. It is a very, very big issue that there are 2 women of color running for this race. But it's not a big issue that it's necessarily to these 2 women of color. Well, and let me also just say, usually when it's 2 white guys running for an office, we don't quibble at all. We simply say, yeah, whoever's the best, whoever we think is going to work, right? That should be the standard. It should be really, really okay and really, really fabulous that 2 women of color are running for the same office. It should be normal. not just here in Portland, but all over the state. It should be very, very normal. Given the population that we are as communities of color, it should be normal that this happens. It shouldn't be an issue, but it is. And that, to me, is really the key issue. The fact that, I think, what is it, 5? I thought it was closer to 8% of the state that would actually, are actually people of color in our legislature. That means that we are certainly not representative of who we are in the state. That means that we have a lot of work to do. And to me, having been born and raised in this state, having lived in my district for so many, many years, and being a Native American who, you know, as I tell people all the time, I recognize very, very clearly that my person, my individual person, my tribe, my culture, we have had laws in this country that affected only us for many, many years. As African Americans have had laws that affected only them, as other communities of color have had laws that affected only them, as other, you know, people of different genders have had laws that affected only them. We need to figure out how we make that different for the state of Oregon. We need to figure out how we work together in a way that is just respectful and kind. But as the first Native American in the Oregon State Legislature, that would not only mean a lot to me as an individual, but it would mean a lot to our communities who recognize that people of color actually are finally making a step to do something about the laws that affect only a few individuals. Thank you.
Thank you. Roberta Phillip Robbins, your closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Kalpana, and my gratitude to the City Club. I'd like to take us back to the story I began in my opening statement. What I didn't tell you about was the lab coat. During the first week of high school, each of us was measured for a lab coat, and I remember trying mine on when it came in. I looked at that young woman in the mirror, and I did not recognize who she was. The woman I saw was brilliant. And in the time it took to fasten 3 buttons, I gained a feeling of value and acceptance that hadn't been there before. Fast forward to a different classroom, one where I'm the teacher. Every day I worked hard to give my students what I felt when I wore that lab coat. And I believe I did that. But for some students, something happened when they left my classroom. My work would unravel. It was clear that some of my students needed so much more than I could provide them in 50 minutes a day. And that's why I left teaching to earn a law degree, to effect systems level change. There isn't one answer to this problem. In fact, I know we all wish that there was. But one thing I really do feel strongly about is the power of mentorship. And that's why in 2004, as a second-year law student, I started a mentoring program at Rosemary Anderson High School here in Portland and recruited 20 future lawyers and judges to come with me. We gained perspective, and the law students developed confidence, and we broke down walls and truly saw each other. The program continues to be a success and resulted in the Roberta Phillip Scholarship that still exists today. You know, I'm proud of that work, of that legacy that I left at Rosemary Anderson High School, and I'm proud of my work inside and outside the classroom. First, when I championed restorative justice in schools to reduce discipline disparities, and again, my community work to reduce youth violence. I was also honored to chair the statewide Council on Civil Rights and push for best practices for employers on how to close the gender pay gap, and to be a board member of MotherPAC, a very active coalition member in the successful fights for paid sick days and increasing the minimum wage, an organization that's endorsed me in this campaign. As your state legislator, I will continue to search for solutions and get results for our community on affordable housing for everybody, affordable childcare, paid family leave, and to shine a bright light on our criminal justice system so that all of us can believe and trust in equal justice for all. In closing, I'd like to thank a few of those who are standing with me. Representative Lou Frederick, who's the current legislator for the House District 43 and who is running for the Senate, Governor Barbara Roberts, Chair Deborah Kafori, former state senators Avel Gordley and Margaret Carter, and County Commissioners Loretta Smith, Judy Shiprack, and Portland City Commissioner Steve Novick. The Oregon League of Conservation Voters, the Oregon State Firefighters Council, and the Portland Association of Teachers. I'm the only candidate in this race to be endorsed by NARAL, Pro-Choice Oregon, and 9 labor unions. My name is Roberta Phillip Robbins. I'm running for House District 43, and I respectfully ask for your vote.
Thank you.
We're out of broadcast time. As we close, remember this is a great day to join City Club. This is City Club President Greg McPherson. In addition to the thanks we just extended to the candidates, let's thank our moderator, Kalpana Krishnamurthy, as well as Colin Jones of the Friday Forum Committee, who produced this program. We're adjourned.